who told the Europeans where to go? How did they know? What were they searching? They must have had some indicator that around this region of Africa, there was an abundance of not only black people, but riches such as gold. They must have known. What I'm about to share is there was a whole campaign of over 100 years to get to the western part of Africa.
Okay.
Right? So I'm like, someone told them. There must have been a major event that led to news spreading all over, all the way to Europe, that must have given indication that if you do come to this region of the world down south in Africa, there lies riches in both humans and whether it's gold or whatever it is.
Yeah, infinite resources almost.
Check this comment out. That black man is nothing without the white man. And the person who put out this comment had earlier said that Africa wouldn't even know its minerals existed if it weren't for Europe. Honestly, that's not just wrong, it's insulting. And it's the same old colonial mindset that was meant to make Africans doubt themselves. And that is why I share these stories, because if we don't change the narrative, Africa won't move forward. The truth is, Africa was something long before colonization. We had civilizations. Mali with its wealth, we've heard about this over and over. Scholarships in Timbuktu, Ethiopia's ancient kingdoms, the empires of Congo and Zimbabwe. Africans were trading, building, innovating, and shaping global history. We smelted iron in Nok and Kush, gold-powered Mali and Ghana, salt, copper, ivory, all traded across Africa and beyond. Even the Mauritanian ore that sparked this comment I'm referencing to. Africans were mining and working with metals centuries before Europeans showed up. Colonialism didn't discover Africa, it extracted from it. It didn't create African identity, it disrupted it. In fact, what people call Western civilization was built using Africa's resources, labor and knowledge. Enslaved Africans built parts of Europe and the Americas. African minerals powered industries, and today African culture, from our music and fashion to food and philosophy, still shapes the world. So when someone says the black man would be nothing without the white man, I flip it around. What would the modern world be without Africa? For me, the bottom line is this. We are not defined by colonization or by Europe. We are defined by our history, our resilience, and our future. Africa was something before colonization. It is something now, and it will even be greater as we keep on telling our own stories.
Grand rising kings and queens from Africa and across the ocean. Much love to you. And thank you so much for tuning in. Now, I want to come clean. I want to come clean today. And because for centuries, for a number of years, as African, because I'm in Kenya, and Kenya is in Africa, they never told us who we really are. They never told us who we are before slavery, before colonization. Because Africa was already great. Africa already had mighty empires, brilliant kings and queens, and civilizations so advanced that the world is still struggling to catch up. But in school, they give us something different. They gave us chains, slavery, colonization. They started my history as Kenyan beast as a generation came from colonization. They made me believe that we were nothing until Europe discovered us. And that was the first lie. And in this video, I'm going to break it apart. I'm going to say the reality, what we were taught in school, what we were not taught in school. But before I go down with that video, I want you to watch these clips here, and then we talk more.
But the CT scan has one more surprise for Alejandro. Shemai's ethnicity.
Well, they have just told me that Shemai have Nubian features, which means that their ruling family was probably Nubian, and that was unexpected.
Examining Shemai's anatomy closely, the thickness of his bones and the shape of his nasal cavity, the anthropologists think he was a black African, likely from neighboring Nubia. A huge revelation that challenges the prevailing image of the Egyptian ruling class.
We always thought the ancient Egyptian elite were Mediterranean type. And in this sense, Shema is representing the society of the frontier in which different ethnic groups were mixed. At the end, it doesn't matter the color of your skin. Shema was Egyptian.
Do you know why they won't teach us the history of Egypt? After you have shackled and enslaved a people, branded, castrated, lynched, burned, and tortured them, you called them 3/5 of a man, subspecies, an ape, a monkey, and a general inferior creation. How can we then admit that they are our teachers and the ones who gave us civilization? How can we admit that we descended from Greece and from Rome, and that Greece and Rome stole everything they knew from Egypt? How to admit that? There's no room in a white supremacist psyche for black contributions to civilization or world progress. This reaches too far into the consciousness of the so-called objective white scholars of academia and their black-skinned counterparts. This is like asking a Nazi to accept the Jewish origins of Nazism and of Hitler, if that were the case. They couldn't accept it if it were true any more than the white supremacists can accept the African origins of civilization, the African origins of Christianity, the African origins of science, the African origins of everything. Philosophy originated in Egypt. Math originated in Egypt. Theology originated in Egypt. Philosophy originated in Egypt. Letters originated in Egypt. Everything started there. They were as ancient to the Romans as the Romans now are to us. And that's what we don't really understand because we live now. We don't really understand that the pyramids are 5,000 years old and that the Romans only date back 2,500 years. Like, really think about that. Because that's the world we live in, a world of lies. I'm reading from J. California Cooper's book, The Wake of the Wind. I am Africa. I am a place. I am a state of mind. Hundreds of years ago, my children lived free. We had our skirmishes within my shores, even small wars that did not disturb my great and sprawling land. We were not perfect, but we never lift our shores to seek to destroy or rob any other culture or people, to steal the fruit of their land or mines and leave the land and people ravaged. Nor did we seek to steal any people's love of themselves, nor tell other people they were ignorant savages and inferior, while we were superior, as the white ones said to us. They lied so much and long they began to believe it themselves. They cried God with their mouths while holding a knife in one hand and a gun in the other, slicing and firing at vibrant life. They also brought with them other diseases, including endless greed, envy, and hate. Our nations changed. They killed for land, women, or gold, spreading their savageness to all others. And now they have influenced others. Anathema. Enough. How do we repay our debt to black people?
The ancient Kemet people were in northern Africa, because there's no such thing as the Middle East.
That's right.
Right? It's a politicized term to try to take the pyramids out of Africa by just making it up as if that landmass is not connected to the continent, which is wildly insane. But when I went there and I looked on the walls and I'm staring around, I ain't see one light-skinned face. Man, if they were light-skinned, they was like light-skinned. You feel me? I ain't see one pale human being on that wall. They was all dark-skinned, you understand me, melanated with muscles, doing Kemetic yoga, you know what I mean, floating pyramids and living life. I even seen the sister, one of them had braids on and everything. Like, it's irrefutable that was a melanated brown person. The depictions of the people by the people are still there and preserved. Yes, yes. So the idiocy of, if you haven't been there, maybe this is your ignorance because of the way you've been taught, right? And history has been, whitewashed. But in the reality, if you go there and you visit and you look for yourself, there's only one conclusion you can come to.
That's it.
The Egyptians were black. The chemists, the builders of the pyramid were black. That's simple.
All over the continent, there's a dearth of knowledge about pre-colonial Africa. And actually, sadly, also inside Africa itself, let alone outside of the continent. It seems to many people that Africa's history begins with the European presence. And of course, that's not the case at all. And in the 18 chapters in my book, it's only in chapter 14 that I begin with the transatlantic slave trade, and subsequently those chapters do look at the presence of the Europeans and the detrimental impact of their activities on the continent. So I was very keen to ensure that people understood that Africa, which is after all where everybody came from, it's the oldest continent, or the oldest continent in terms of the human presence, actually has the longest history, and yet ironically it's the shortest in most people's minds. I think if you said to most people, name a couple of kings or queens of Africa, I should think most people would say Tutankhamun. They'd be hard pressed to give him a date. And I'm not sure they'd come up with many more names. So it is that level of ignorance that I wanted to tackle in the book. But for me also, who is telling the story of Africa's history was just as important, which is why it's called an African history of Africa, because my sources are predominantly of African historians, archaeologists, anthropologists, and it seems to me that they have been denied their rightful place on the global intellectual stage.
This is the original map of Africa before colonization of Africa. We have to understand the land push. We have to understand the Ashanti, the Twa, the Nook dynasty of Nigeria. We have to understand the ancient empires of Africa to understand the identity of the Africans. Islam being brought to East Africa, Christianity being brought to Africa and West Africa. This was purposely done to cover up the ancient history and to brainwash Africans into worshipping YT people and Arabs. The original empires of Africa didn't know about no Jesus, didn't know about no Muhammad, and didn't know about none of these stories in these religious books. They had a spirituality that was throughout Africa, that at one time on the planet, it was universal. That's why everywhere on the globe, there's pyramids. You gotta start knowing our ancient African history, resurrecting it as African people.
When the colonizers came to Africa, we didn't have the issue of color. Black and white did not exist in our languages. We were Africans. The missionaries were sent in with specific instructions to make the Africans believe that everything African was bad and everything European was better and more desirable. They put in motion a process of making us dislike that which was ours and go all out to embrace what the new invader was bringing to our beloved continent. I have to give it to them. They did a very good job at doing that. They hit us where it hurt the most, the mind. The missionaries taught us about white angels. The missionaries taught us about the devil who was black. The missionaries are white, like the angels. And that when we go to church, we must worship the white angels. And definitely want nothing to do with the black devil who looks like us. Subliminal messaging. Subliminal messaging. That's where we began the self-hate, the mistrust of each other, the lack of appreciation, an idea that is coming from your brother, an idea that is coming from your sister. Because
welcome back. Now, have you ever noticed how every African textbook school is? Every history with slavery and colonization, okay? And that was deliberate because they wanted generations of Africans to believe that we were born in chains, that we hold no glory, we hold no wisdom, we hold no greatness until a white man arrived and discovered. History didn't start with pain. Our history starts with the power. That's all I know. Before slavery, Africa was not just surviving. Before slavery, Africa was thriving. Empires like Mankai, Kush, Kemet, Axiom, Great Zimbabwe, Benin, Oyo, and many more ruled with knowledge. They ruled with mathematics. They ruled with trade. They had economy. They had architecture. But you know what? In classrooms, in history classrooms, mostly here in Africa, we were told that the pyramids were mysteries, okay? They told us that the Greeks discovered, but the reality is Greek philosophers studied in Africa. They say that Europe discovered mathematics when Africa was already calculating the stars. They told us that Africa was the dark continent when in truth, Africa was the continent that lit up the torch of civilization. That was the lie number one. Lie from the beginning. Now, They stole our discoveries. Whenever Africa created something powerful, they gave the credit to someone else. When African built pyramids, they say that aliens must have did it. When African charted the stars in Timbuktu, they said Arabs or Europeans discovered it. When Africans smelted iron before Europe even dreamed of it, they erased it from their books. I never learned that from school. I never learned it from history books. Even medicine in Kemet, in Ethiopia, in African doctors performed surgeries, set broken bones, and used herbal medicine long before Europe. But do you know what they did? Do you know what they teach us? They taught us that medicine was discovered in Europe, that the microscope, the compass, the navigation came from outside Africa. It was lies upon lies designed to erase us from the history of human progress. What they taught us in history books, it is fishing in Japan. They taught us about fishing in Japan. They taught us about Mediterranean and everything back there. So how does fishing in Japan help a kid in Africa whose ancestors built the pyramid, whose ancestors were great mathematics? You are not teaching me how Zimbabwe empire built walls without cement. You are teaching me about fishing in Japan, okay? We have some empires that they never taught us. For example, Mali Empire. It was the home of Mansa Musa, the wealthiest man in history. His empire stretched across West Africa, and the wealth and universities in Timbuktu attracted scholars worldwide across the globe, okay? The schools in Timbuktu attracted millions of scholars from globe, but they never taught us. They never taught us in schools. When you look at the Kemet, ancient Egypt, the mother of civilization, Africans built pyramids. African built temples. African built the world's first universities. They mapped the stars. They created writing systems and influenced the entire world. But in our schools, they made Egypt Middle Eastern. In our schools, they disconnect Egypt from Africa. Arabs did it. That's what they said. When you got the kingdom of Kush, powerful Nubian king and queens, black pharaohs who ruled Egypt, but they never taught us this because they didn't want us to know that we are royalty. But great Zimbabwe, a city built of stones, advanced architecture without European influence. Okay? But do you know what the colonizers said? They say that it must have been built by Arabs or outsiders. They couldn't believe that Africans did it. A lot and a lot. Name Benin Kingdom. And you ask yourself, why were we lied? Why did they lie? They lie because psychological welfare. They lied because of psychological war. If they could erase our greatness, they control us. They control our minds, because a people without memory are a people without power. So if African children grow up knowing their ancestors built civilization, their ancestors ruled empires and created science and mathematics, then no colonizer could ever convince us we are inferior, just as their children. Their children have grown up knowing that white parents are the most technologically educated, powerful. They build America, the dreams and everything. So when you tell a white kid about you are not great, he will not believe it because it was lied from the first time. And how will they do that? They rewrite history. They control the curriculum. They forced colonial education into our systems, into our schools. They made sure the story begin with slavery, with colonization, because that way every African child will grow up thinking that we were saved by Europe. And that's what I grew up thinking, that white people saved me. That without white people, we black people ain't there. That is reality. I can't lie. I grew up knowing white people are superior, are gods. But it's a lie. When it started from the beginning, the birth of humanity itself, science itself admits the truth that Africa is the cradle of humankind. The oldest human remains, it was found in Ethiopia and Kenya, I think so. And this proved that life began right here in African soil. So we are the mothers and fathers of the entire human race. Every nation, every race, every people of the earth come from us. But in school, they didn't tell us this. Okay? They didn't tell us this with pride. They brushed over it. You know, like there's some lessons they taught us like the whole month. You are learning about called what? Vasco da Gama. But when it comes to history of Africa, they brush it off like they just pass by. Now, what they wanted us to do, they wanted us to believe that we are followers but not leaders. But the truth is, Africa was first and Africa is original, and Africa is eternal. And if you don't know your beginning, you will never know your destiny. Okay? They stole some empires, like the empire of Kemet was stolen and rebranded or rewrite. You know, it was called ancient Egypt. It was called world-class ancient Egypt. This Kemet is one of the greatest thefts in history. The land of black pharaohs, where kings and queens ruled for thousands of years, has been rewritten to exclude Africa. Every pyramid, every temple, every papyrus scroll was the work of African hand. The Nile Valley produced scholars. The Nile Valley produced engineers. The Nile Valleys produced architects and priests whose knowledge spread across the world. They invented writing systems. They invented mathematics, calendars, and science. They understood astronomy before telescopes even existed. But you know what colonials said? What colonials said is that Egypt was not Africa. Egypt was Middle East. They turned Pharaoh to white. They turned Egyptians to white or to Arabs, you know. They turned the Mediterranean people to Arabs. When they drew the pictures, when they showed us in the screens, they showed us as a lighter. In the textbooks, they showed them as lighter. Why? Because they wanted to remove the idea that they were black. And by doing that, is erasing black people from that story. And by erasing black people from that story, is telling us that we have no hand in the history of Kemet, the greatest civilization to ever be. That means what? They are the one who brought civilization to us. I talked about Timbuktu, the city of Timbuktu in Mali. It was not a desert of poverty. It wasn't a desert of poverty. Timbuktu was once intellectual capital of the world. The universities of Sankore and libraries was filled with thousands and thousands of manuscripts on mathematics, on astronomy, on law, on medicine, and philosophy. How comes we were not taught about this? How comes they tried to rewrite the history and erase about Timbuktu? Mansa Musa, the ruler of Mali, was not only the richest man of history, not only the richest man in history, but he built a society where knowledge was valued more than gold. Rumors have it, Mansa Musa once visited Asian countries and he was filthy rich and he was giving presents with gold. And even when he moved from there, when he went back to Mali from Asia, the countries went bankrupt because everyone had gold. The economy went down because of Mansa Musa. How rich can he be? But you know, they rebranded the story of Timbuktu because they wanted us to admire Columbus and Vasco da Gama instead of knowing Mansa Musa, Askia the Great, or Queen Nziga. Instead of Queen Nziga, we never read about this. We were never taught about Mansa Musa in deep. We were never taught about Askia the Great in deep. But you know what they did to us? They made us worship Vasco da Gama. They made us worship Christopher Columbus. They made us worship Dr. Livingstone because they are the ones who are written. They discovered Africa. They discovered this lake. They discovered this mountain. How can you discover something where already people are living there? I wish you could just say they wrote the history because our ancestors were making oral presentation. But now you came with receipts. Another thing they erased from African history was our scientific genius. Because long before Europe, Africans studied the stars. The Dogon people of Mali knew about Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye. Centuries before telescopes, we already were discovering, or we already were calculating the stars. Now, how did they know? Because our ancestors mapped the heavens with precision. In mathematics, in technology, Africa was ahead, but they erased this from us. Okay? Now, I'll say this. Colonial education was a greatest weapon to us. Okay? Education was weaponized when Europeans colonized Africa. Okay? They knew that they could not control us forever by guns. So they had to control us with the brain. They brainwashed us. Lord Macaulay said it clearly in 1835 when Britain ruled India that we must create a class of persons who are Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, English in opinions, in morals, and in intellect. He said it. Lord Macaulay, I think. And this is why our history was erased. This is why they began the timeline with slavery. This is why our heroes are replaced with theirs. They whitewash us. So they wanted Africa to grow up believing that our greatness was not real, that we had no past worth remembering. But they emphasized in colonization. They taught us deeply in colonization. They went deep into colonization and how they saved us and how they gave us independence in 1956, in 1965. Kenya got independent in 1967, and the birth of Kenya. How can it be the birth of Kenya in 1967 where we had these countries way back before now? We need to think some things. But family, the ancestors said something while in chains. They said that one day the truth will rise. So what we are seeing right now, the youths are starting to rising. The youths are now reading. The youths are now knowing the truth. It's a prophecy being fulfilled. African youths right now are rising. In diaspora, Africans youths are rising. Black youths are rising. And we are telling them that no more lies. No more lies, because right now we are going direct to the history. We extract, we have information. Social media has made things easier. So I'll say this. At sometimes, as a black person, you sit down and belittle yourself thinking that you are nothing. I want to tell you today, are somebody. You are the first human being. Without you, there's no white people. Without you, there's no civilization. Without you, no science, no mathematics. Without you, no traffic lights. Without you, no everything that is making the world being the world right now started in Africa. God, Jesus himself started in Africa. But what they did, they rebranded him. They made him white and made him there. That is a lot. There's a lot that we did not learn in school. They hid from us. Tell me some of the facts that you think that Africa, we were lied to. Tell me some things on the comment section that you think they never told us in school. If you are from Africa, talk to me right now. Until next episode, peace out.